Hello, welcome back to London Centuries. Starting in a different place today for another one of these videos of a slightly longer bike ride with a bookish or a somewhat historical theme. Today's ride is more history than literature. Ever heard of a bloke called Sir Robert Cary? No? Well, you're about to find out a thing or two about him. Sir Robert Cary was a minor nobleman, late 1500s, early 1600s. So quite a long time ago. And why am I setting off from a slightly different location than normal? Because that was Charing Cross Station, wasn't it? But still in the West End of London, going up through Mornington Crescent actually, and up through Camden, rather too early for the traffic. So that was up through Camden and St Albans and now Harpenden. Out of town a bit by now. Now back to Sir Robert Cary and this bike ride. First of all, a bit of context. Queen Elizabeth I had a cousin. His name was Henry. He had 10 sons. The youngest of those 10 sons was Robert. He's going to be the hero of our story today. So Robert was kind of on the edge of royalty, not close enough to be particularly significant, but I guess he was in with a chance. You know, he could hang out at court and hang around with the bigwigs and stuff. And that's what he did. When he was a young man, he went up to Scotland and he met King James, who was the King of Scotland, because back in those days, separate monarchs in England and Scotland, they were separate kingdoms. But he was a bit short of money from time to time. And his spending outstripped his income, which created certain difficulties. He was particularly known for spending money on fine clothes so that he could look like a fancy courtier and hang out with all the rich guys. But these clothes didn't come cheap, you see. And at one point he'd run out of money, and in what can only have been a desperate attempt to keep himself afloat, he entered into an insane bet, a wager with someone else at court. And he bet them no less than £2,000. That's £2,000 in 1579 money. I think it was 1579 or 1580 anyway. And his bet was that he couldn't walk all the way from London to Berwick-upon-Tweed in 12 days. And you know what? He did it, apparently. And I think this shows a couple of things. First of all, that there were people at court with nothing better to do than waste enormous sums of money on stupid bets. But secondly, that he was a fairly physically tough, fit kind of guy, because I had a look at the map and it's 350 miles from London to Berwick. He must have been walking 30 miles a day. And you think, yeah, okay, so that's possible. It's pretty hard work though. 1580, roads weren't much good. It's not like he had Nike Air Max shoes and stuff. Another thing it shows, perhaps, is that Sir Robert Cary's fortunes were rather precarious, and that he was a bit desperate and would come up with all manner of harebrained schemes to keep himself afloat. Today's bike ride isn't to do with that trip to Berwick. That's just background for colour. It's actually to do with another one of his crazy journeys. This one's even better, I reckon, because in 1603 he was back down in London again. Oh yeah, I should have said that when he got to Berwick, the connection is that Berwick's up in Northumberland, you know. Northumberland was his, that was his home turf. That was his patch. And of course, it's the border country between England and Scotland. Back in those days, the border was a bit wild and lawless. There was always the threat of war between England and Scotland. There was at least one occasion where he was carrying messages on official business, and he wasn't allowed to cross the border. Had to pass his message on at the border itself to be transferred by one of the king's goons, I suppose. And in fact, the border country was split into 3 regions, and he was given command of one of them, and that was his job, overseeing a patch of bandit country, really, all a bit wild and lawless, a bit unstable, not terribly safe. That £2,000 that Sir Robert Cary won in his crazy bet walking to Berwick was enough for him to live for several years in court. And in fact, I looked up how much £2,000 in 1580 money would be worth today. It's a lot of money. It's like £400,000 in cash, or a bit more, I think. But the purchasing power was perhaps even greater than that. Like at the time, what you could buy with £2 grand, it was like 242 horses, more than 1,000 cows, or 40,000 days of skilled labour. Sounds like rather a lot to me. Oh, I wonder if I can stop and get a drink. Getting thirsty. No, villages don't have shops anymore, do they? There's a pub. Oh no, hang on, here's the shop. I'm going to pull in. So it kept him going for a while, but not forever. Now, fast forward a bit to 1603, which I think I mentioned back there, and he was back in London again. But this time, things were going to change, because Elizabeth was getting old, and obviously she wasn't going to go on forever. Whee! Wah! And it's obvious that our Robert started plotting. Elizabeth didn't have any children, and she steadfastly refused to name her successor on the throne. And Sir Robert Cary doesn't say this in his memoirs, but reading between the lines and using a bit of guesswork, it's not too difficult to imagine some of the thoughts that might have gone through his mind. Because it was obvious that amongst the contenders for the throne after Elizabeth, King James of Scotland was one of the contenders, and if he did get it, then the border between Scotland and England was going to change, wasn't it? And if I was in Sir Robert Cary's shoes, I'd think that my job would probably stop existing if that happened, which would be bad for me. So anyway, it was March 1603. Elizabeth was ailing. She left London, went down to Richmond, taking all her council with her, council of closest lords, I suppose. And our hero Sir Robert went to take a peek at what was going on. For 10 or 12 days she was just kind of like going downhill. And on March the 23rd, it was a Wednesday, she lost the power of speech. It was obvious that the end was nigh, and she still hadn't said who her successor was going to be. The way he tells it in his memoirs, she has all her lords and council gathered around her bed. She can't speak, and the name of King James just comes up in the context of succession, and she lifts a hand to her head, something like that. And by this sign, they all knew that he was going to be the king. That's how they did the transfer of power in those days. Anyway, that's his version of events. So put yourself in Sir Robert's shoes. At this point, you're going to want to cozy up to King James big time. Plus, you've got a piece of information that you know is going to be extremely valuable to him. Sir Robert wanted to be the guy to deliver the news to King James, but equally obviously the lords of the council didn't want him to be able to do that and profit personally out of the situation, so they left instructions to stop anybody leaving. But our Robert was smart, and if you remember, he had lots of brothers. You know, he was the youngest of 10, right? And one of his brothers was a lord and member of the council, senior bloke. And the porter who was controlling the gate couldn't possibly disobey Robert's brother, the lord. So he opened the gate, Robert's brother went out, Robert quickly snuck out tailgating behind him, and he whizzed up to his lodgings, which were at Charing Cross, which, if you remember, was where I started this ride this morning. See, it's all coming together now, but not before leaving a sum of money for a messenger to bring him the news the moment the Queen had breathed her last, which is what duly happened. The Queen died in the early hours of the next morning, and Sir Robert got the news around about 3 AM, at which point Sir Robert went back to bed. But what she didn't know was that the lords of the council had been plotting too, and they'd come up with a sneaky plan. They sent a messenger to tell him to come back to Richmond in the hope of making him think that they would give him the job of taking the news to King James, so he'd be able to do it officially. Actually, that was never going to happen. What was going to happen was he'd go back to Richmond and they would detain him and send somebody else in his stead. And as the messenger brought him this news, there was another source from the council who whispered in Sir Robert's ear and told him what was really going on, at which point he turned, mounted his horse and away for Edinburgh. So Sir Robert left Charing Cross between 9 and 10 in the morning on Thursday the 24th. He could cover a bit of country, could our Robert, as we know. And that night he got as far as Doncaster, which is where I'm riding to now. That's the whole idea of this ride. And in fact, I'm nearly there now. I've less than 10 kilometers to go. And I tried to calculate the most direct route using all the modern software and all that stuff, and it'll come out at about 290 kilometers, something like that. He didn't have GPS and he didn't have software. I don't know what route he took. Wow, I'm here, this is it, this is Doncaster. Well, I'm back in London now after a quick train journey, and I wanted to finish off the story about Sir Robert Carey, but it was too darn cold hanging around in Doncaster. It was freezing, starting to rain. So if you want to know, did he get to Edinburgh and did he get the news to the king in time? Yes, he did. And what's more, it seems, as far as the historians are concerned, that as far as recorded journeys between London and Edinburgh are concerned, he set a record that wasn't even touched for hundreds of years afterwards, until they invented the stagecoach. So our Robert did well, at least in that respect. However, it didn't actually do him much good. The day after he got to Doncaster, he carried on and went to his house in Northumberland. That must have been the Friday, I think. And then the next morning he set off from there to Holyrood to meet the king. But he had a nasty fall off his horse, and as he came off, the horse kicked him in the head. And he says that he lost a lot of blood and had to ride slowly as a result. Shouldn't laugh, really. So it's quite nasty. And the result was he didn't get to Holyrood until the king had already gone to bed for the night. But someone roused His Majesty, and Sir Robert got the audience he knelt down, kissed his hand and saluted him as the monarch of England, Scotland, Ireland and France. And then there was an awkward bit because the king asked for proof, and of course he didn't have any, or he didn't have anything official. But the story goes that he gave the king a blue ring, which apparently James had given to someone in Elizabeth's court to be given back to him when she was dead. I suppose that's how they did things in those days. They had secret code rings and stuff instead of photographic evidence. So he was in favour for a couple of days, but that's all. And I can't help wondering whether the lords from the council kind of caught up with him. It was very frowned upon what he'd done. Although in later life he did get made into an earl, and I think he went on an official business to Spain or something like that. Sounds rather nice. So maybe he did get his reward after all, in a way. Just had to wait for it. So there you have it, the story of Sir Robert Cary and his March 1603 dash from London to Doncaster and on to Edinburgh. That was a nice training ride for me. I'm trying to get a few miles in because I have a big ride coming up next month and it's going to take it out of me. But more about that will be revealed later. There'll be more from me in a couple of weeks, I hope. Till then, thanks for watching London Centuries. Ride safely. Catch you next time. Toodle pip.